Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a bit of a paradox, really. It's this widespread fear about something that, well, the data shows is actually surprisingly safe. I'm talking about hunting, and specifically the liability concerns that often stop landowners, from leasing out perfectly good vacant land.
It really is a fascinating disconnect, isn't it? When hunting comes up, public perception seems heavily skewed by the rare but maybe severe incident. People often mix up how bad something could be with how likely it is to happen. A really serious but rare accident might make headlines, but you don't hear constantly about all the twisted ankles from weekend basketball.
Exactly, and that's the crux of it. Landowners often operate under this, let's call it false impression. It's driven by the sort of psychological weight of firearms, making them overestimate the real risk.
Right.
So our mission today is to cut through that perception, look at the hard comparative data, and then explore what really brings peace of mind: safety rules and the right insurance.
Right. The core argument here, based on a lot of comparative data we looked at, is that hunting is statistically, well, quite a bit safer than many activities people do every weekend without batting an eye. Let's dive right into that comparative data, because this is where the common perception really starts to unravel.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's compare it to things people do all the time, things that don't need special permits or loads of training, like everyday hobbies.
Exactly. Think about team sports, basketball, for instance. The injury rate there is somewhere between 6 to maybe 14 injuries for every 1,000 player hours. Soccer's pretty variable, but you're looking at maybe 4 to 35 injuries per 1,000 hours. Even baseball, which feels slower paced, right? It still clocks in around 0.057 injuries per 100 player hours.
Wow, okay. Just comparing those numbers to how people feel about halting risk, it's already, and yeah, it's out of sync.
Right.
What about something like cycling? The casual rider on a path seems totally harmless.
Cycling actually ranks surprisingly high. We're talking about 163 injuries per 100,000 people. The risk of getting hurt in these common activities is very real, very measurable. It puts things in stark perspective when you look at hunting data. Some reports we saw mention the injury rate is so low, certain AI tools won't even give you a percentage when asked. The risk is just too diffuse.
That's really telling. But let me play devil's advocate for a moment. Okay, so football or cycling might mean broken bones, maybe a concussion. Hunting involves firearms, ballistic risk. How do the reports handle the potential severity of a rare gun accident versus, say, a common surfing wipeout?
That's a fair point. Severity obviously matters. But the data strongly suggests that because of mandatory education, safety protocols, which we'll get into these weapon-related incidents, are actually historically very low, and they're still declining. The injuries that do happen in hunting, they rarely involve the firearm itself.
And to really hammer home how low the risk is comparatively, the analysis you looked at identifies the top 5 activities sending people to the ER each year. Hunting isn't on that list.
Not even close. That top 5 is full of things you see constantly: ATVs, baseball and softball, football, basketball, and cycling. So if you're a landowner worried about liability, well, statistically, the bigger risk might just be the neighborhood pickup game.
Huh. That really sums up the statistical side well. But, okay, we're not saying there's zero risk. We need to move beyond just the stats and talk about the low odds, dangers in hunting, and how hunters manage them.
Absolutely. We need to separate the perceived danger, usually focused on the guns, from the operational reality. The 3 main risks for hunters on the ground are falls from tree stands, actual weapon accidents, though rare, and misidentifying targets.
Okay, so of those 3, which one actually causes the most injuries? Because that seems like where the safety focus should be, right?
Without a doubt, it falls from tree stands. That's the #1 source of serious injury. And that immediately shifts the primary safety concern away from firearms and more towards, well, heightened equipment.
Right, which explains the huge emphasis on safety courses and education that you see.
Precisely. And the reports show a really positive trend here. Hunting-related accidents are steadily going down thanks to better safety rules and these mandatory courses. Since falling is the biggest risk, the practical safety checklist really emphasizes gear that, prevents falls.
So if a hunter is using leased land, what are the absolute must-do steps, especially regarding those tree stands?
It really comes down to diligence and using the right gear properly. Of course, completing the education, practicing strict firearm safety, that's baseline. But for elevated stands, the absolute key things are using tree stand safety lines, lineman's belts, and always wearing a safety harness. That's probably the single most effective thing a hunter can do to reduce that main danger.
And it's not just about the gear itself, right? Being aware of the environment matters too, like the terrain, the target.
Correct. Ethics demand you clearly identify your target, obviously, but also watching for dangerous terrain, slippery ground near a stand, for example. And, being mindful of wildlife encounters, which are usually low risk but still possible. Plus, just basic preparedness helps a lot. Carrying emergency supplies, and this is crucial, telling someone your hunt plan. Basic safety stuff.
Okay, so when hunters are diligent and educated, the operational risk gets much, much smaller. But even with the best precautions, landowners still worry about that rare event, the lawsuit. That brings us to financial peace of mind, insurance.
Yes, this is the final critical piece of the puzzle. Getting the right liability insurance is pretty much identified as the most important step in setting up a hunting lease. It acts as a sort of institutional backstop against those, low probability but still possible claims.
It protects everyone involved, yeah.
It protects both sides. The lessors, that's the landowners and the lessees, the hunters leasing the land, protects them from potential liability claims. Just because the stats say risk is low doesn't make it zero. Insurance helps manage that financial exposure.
So, when a landowner gets what's called vacant land and hunting lease coverage, what exactly does that policy promise them?
Okay, so the vacant land part protects the landowner if someone claims bodily injury or property damage happened because of the landowner's negligence. What makes this type of policy really strong is who it covers claims from.
Right, who are we talking about?
It typically extends to claims from three different groups. First, invitees, people invited for the landowner's benefit. Second, licensees like the hunters, who are invited for their own recreation. And interestingly, even trespassers, people accessing the land without permission. The policy generally covers the owner against negligence claims from any of them.
Wow, that is really comprehensive. Okay, let's talk logistics. For a landowner thinking about this, what's the typical cost? And what are the immediate benefits they see when they sign up?
The info we reviewed suggests a pretty clear cost structure, often around 30 cents per acre, usually with a minimum premium, maybe $225 or so. And a couple of things stand out as really beneficial. One, there's often a zero deductible. That's huge for the landowner. Two, coverage can usually start like the very next day.
And the admin side sounds like it's designed for quick reassurance, too.
Yeah, very streamlined. The policy package often includes a custom attorney-approved waiver that's vital legal protection in itself. And importantly, the insurance certificate gets generated and emailed to the landowner immediately. So you get that instant proof of coverage. It removes the waiting and worrying for both sides right from the start.
Okay, so pulling this all together, the main takeaway for you, the listener, seems to be that the high level of fear many landowners have about liability from hunting leases. It's largely based on a skewed perception of the actual risk.
It's exactly. Statistically, hunting stacks up pretty well, safer than common things like cycling or basketball. And the small risks that remain can be effectively managed. First, through mandatory hunter education and hunter diligence. Second, and critically, through specialized insurance policies that offer robust, often no-deductible protection against negligence claims, regardless of who is on the property.
That's a really clear synthesis. We've established safety depends heavily on the hunters themselves, and education is driving down accident rates, particularly with firearms. So here's a final thought to leave you with, building on that need for diligence. If the data shows the two biggest remaining risks are those tree stand falls and target misidentification, what future innovations, maybe beyond just insurance or today's harnesses, could be most effective in trying to eliminate those last few operational dangers?
That's interesting. Maybe things like better real-time topographical data for stand placement, or perhaps some kind of advanced visual tech to aid target ID. Yeah, the evolution of safety tech definitely isn't finished.
Something to think about, maybe, as you look at vacant land opportunities in your own area with a fresh, statistically informed eye. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.